Read the Future Conversations is providing this podcast for educational purposes only. Read the Future is a nonpartisan not-for-profit. It neither takes any position on any political issue nor endorses any candidates, political parties, or public policy proposals. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Read the Future. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Read the Future employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of Read the Future or any of its officials.
Good God. Welcome to episode 7, season finale of season 2. Today our guest speaker is Elsa Kouam. Am I saying that right? Help me.
No, it's Elisa Kouam.
Welcome, Elisa, to season 2, episode 7 of Conversations podcast. This episode, I thank you for helping our audience find as well as become aware of the pillars of everyday life, and as well as to really bring more attention to some of the critical issues from childhood trauma to substance use, homelessness, and more importantly the social cultural preventions. But to really jump right into the discussion, right, perhaps skip the introduction. However, I believe the audience would appreciate getting to know who you are. Would you please help the audience become familiar with your own priorities relating to the issues of social trauma?
Oh, you muted yourself. Can you, my priorities, you said?
Yeah. Sorry, I think it's really I would prefer we skip the introduction, but I believe for the sake of helping the audience, if you could help them become familiar with a little bit more about your background, as well as how you really found social trauma as something to really prioritize in your own work.
For sure. So anybody who's listening or watching, welcome. I'm happy to share a little bit of space with you. Before we jump into any sort of background or anything on my work, I think it's really important, out of respect to everybody and where everyone is in life and work and family and all of these things, to just say that if I talk about something or I mention something that is raw for you or is in healing for you or is something you don't like to think about and you don't want to think about, that you have every power and every decision to just mute this or fast forward it or move on. So starting on the same page, that we're all the same and we've all got things that we don't like to talk about, or things in our stories and our histories and our families that we don't like to talk about, and just sort of starting on a level ground. It's the way I like to start my classes. It's the way I like to start any sort of speaking I do. I was telling Derek earlier that you can have 9 PhDs and $9 million and Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and that doesn't necessarily make you a healthier or more whole, better person. I come from a background where I was taught very early on that you help people and that kindness is the best currency in the whole world, but also that we're the same and no one's better than anybody else, and that we are here to serve each other. So I grew up on the East Coast in New York and New Jersey, in a very diverse community with a very diverse family. And again, I saw firsthand just the way that diversity is strength, and that diverse communities are the way that sustainability is created. I am this huge nerd, this huge science nerd, and I loved biology and chemistry, and I had intended on going to medical school. So come college time, I did all my pre-med requirements and I was all set to go. And then I find out, oops, you need one more, like social studies elective. And I took an intro to social work class. I had exposure as a kid to social workers in my community and things like that. And I thought, well, that'll be fun. And I took an intro to social work class. And after one class, I was done. I changed my major and my entire world changed. the thing for me that changed my life was part of social work that relies on resiliency and what we would call the strengths perspective. So someone can have a litany, a list of things that we would think maybe are wrong with them or things to fix, but seeing what's good and what's powerful and what's already a resiliency factor or what makes someone thrive and survive, that's where we tune into, that's where we rally, and that's where we brainstorm. And I was like, I've never heard this anywhere else. I've never heard this in medicine. I'm done. Changed my major, and my entire life changed after that. I went and I got my master's. I worked in, well, let me pause real quick. Just hearing that, there's something else than all the things that make you wrong, and that you're sitting here listening today because you're amazing and you're surviving and you're persisting in light of all the other things going on in the world. Like that, I had never heard that anywhere else. And
that's
and
life changing now.
Yeah. And so we call that resiliency theory or strengths perspective. And so I got the bug, I was bit. I went, finished my bachelor's. I went and I got my master's. And I was really interested in like systemic issues and why people are at risk and why people are vulnerable. In social work, part of our mission is that we serve everybody, but we specifically serve those who are oppressed, marginalized, ignored, silenced, people that other people think have no value, right? Societally, someone doesn't have value. Those are our people. That is traditionally where we serve. And so I was really interested in these systemic issues, and I learned real quick about child abuse and neglect, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Amazing from the opportunity that it hit exactly what I was interested in.
Interesting,
Yeah, all these different places, right? And so where you are prejudging somebody and you think they're terrible, but they're just going through life and they need kindness and they need help and they need support. So I did quite a bit of child abuse and neglect work, and I was doing my best. I had this shiny new MSW, and I was all trained and I was ready to go. And I was not helping the way that I thought I could help. I had families who I would pour all these resources into and support them. And then, things would get better. We'd put the families back together. And in a couple months, they would come back across my desk again with some more abuse or neglect or whatever it was. And I thought, well, what's going on? Why am I not helping? I'm wasting their time. I'm disrespecting them if I'm not helping. And I didn't know what I was seeing.
Right.
I got really irritated. I'm still irritated. And I tell my students all the time, follow what upsets you. Follow what you're like, why don't they do something about that? Like the thing that you're like, why do they, that's your contribution to the world. Because if you're angry, you're going to problem solve and you're going to hunt down information and you're going to try and be better and show up better in the world. I love everybody and everything, but the things that upset me are when people get the short end of the stick in the system, or there's racism or ableism or oppression, or someone thinks that they aren't worthy of belonging and love and respect, right? And so I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I couldn't help my families. And I got really, really irritated. And that irritation gave me some jaw problems, full disclosure, because I grit my teeth, but it fueled me through. Seriously. I
understand.
Yeah, I'm like, all the time. And my wrinkle right here. Just the thing I got from that. But it fueled me through a 5-year PhD, and I was like, okay, I got to figure out what is this thing that my families are experiencing that I'm not doing, I'm not helping, supporting. And I learned real quick that it was trauma. And this was right at the cusp of when we were starting to realize that trauma happens in the mind and the body and the family and the community. It's not just I cut myself hiking, I need to go to the ER, I'm bleeding kind of trauma. that is a medical trauma, but I'm talking about the trauma that you can't see. The abuse, the neglect, the racism, the histories of slavery, the histories of colonization, the histories of emotional wounds that are told in families, they're told in stories, right? And they're carried, they're held onto. And so I realized that I wasn't at all measuring or treating or even talking about trauma with my families. And I thought I was doing the right thing, and I wasn't, because it wasn't trauma informed. And ever since then, my entire body of work and teaching, I'm also a trauma-informed yoga practitioner, teacher, and student. Everything for me revolves around trauma and realizing that we all have these stories we don't tell, and that we all have experiences that stick with us. And sometimes those experiences are the reasons why we show up in the world the way that we do, or the way that we show up negatively in the world, or why we can't seem to make things to make things work.
Yeah.
And all my pre-med stuff, the last thing I'll say, all my pre-med stuff, I use every single day because I'm really fascinated by the brain and the way that trauma is encoded in the brain, and it's encoded in the way that our brains learn and the way we respond to stimuli and the way our bodies respond to stress. So when you've got experiences of trauma or you've endured trauma, your body and your brain react very differently in the world. So I was able to bring all my pre-med stuff in and all my social work stuff in and all my yoga stuff in and kind of smush it together. And now I'm here. Now I lead the Masters of Social Work programs here at SU, and I get to talk all day about this kind of stuff to my students too.
No, like, the thing, like what you just mentioned, like, has really helped me, like, become more familiar with you as well, but also getting a much more holistic view of trauma, not just from, going hiking and I bruise my knee and I'm like, but the whole body definition of trauma and also the whole yoga teacher experience. I'm actually looking to be a certified yoga teacher myself. So like it's a good experience to just have, in your belt of things. And that is remarkable. Elisa, right? I've been saying Elsa in my head.
That's okay.
Since I've been emailing you. So thanks for letting me know. It's Elsa?
Elisa, okay.
Elisa. Thank you. And to really now go further into the stats, right? I think you probably heard of the AZ Town Hall. And some of their works really boil down into what you just discussed, and to help define the scope of the problem, right? Arizona Town Hall published a report June 2019 stating that 20% of adults had mental illness. 5.6% had serious mental illness, 7.1% had substance use disorder. Those are staggering numbers, and would you, like, you mentioned that there are different variables of trauma, and if you could differentiate what do you see as obstacles to treatment as well as prevention to between mental illnesses and trauma?
Well, I want to step back and talk about the numbers a little bit, because those estimates are really just that. They're estimates, and they're estimates because in research, there's something known as social demand, where if I ask you about something that is painful or upsetting or socially taboo, you're going to underreport, right? So when I teach research, I tell my students, if I ask people about their gambling or their drinking or how much pornography they're watching, of course they're going to say, oh, I don't do any of that. I don't gamble. I don't drink. I don't do any of these things, right? Same problems happen when I ask people, or the researchers ask about drug habits, right? People, oh, I don't do that, or it's not that bad, right? Because there's a social taboo against that kind of thing. And unfortunately, this is the tragedy of our modern time. There's a social taboo against mental health, in that, well, it's not that bad. Or just put your bootstraps on, buck up, buttercup, you're okay. When in reality, mental health equates to pain and suffering, right? So if somebody, again, let's go back to the hiking analogy. Somebody fell and they've got a gush on their leg. Oh my gosh, yes, let's help you right now. You're in pain. I can see it. Let's take care of it. Let's give you pain. Let's get you in rehab, all these things. But if I have a really bad car accident and I have flashbacks from that and I can't sleep, I might get a couple days off of work, maybe some Ambien, and that's it, right? Because it's not that bad, right?
Right.
Deal with
you
it.
Can't see it, right?
Right. You can't see it. You can't measure it. Well, you can, but you can't measure it by seeing it. And so the estimates are very conservative, very conservative. People like me, people in my field are confident that most adults have experiences of trauma. So again, if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I've had a lot of things happen to me that are traumatic, you're not alone. Most of us have. Most of us have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 traumatic things that have happened to us. And so just kind of neutralizing that. And if you're struggling, it's not because anything's wrong with you. It's because life is hard. And the older you get, things get more complicated. And then when you throw family and work and money and pandemics and inflation and pets and kids and all these things into that, it just gets harder. So again, I want to repeat that. If you learn nothing else from this, if you're struggling, there's nothing wrong with you. You're struggling because life is hard.
Life is hard, yeah.
Life is hard. And if we all just looked at each other and were like, life is hard, how can we help each other a little bit more? I'm confident the world would change, right? And I'm hopeful that Gen Z is going to do that, right?
I believe too as well. So I mean, this is one way of helping someone understand life is hard. So thank you for sharing. I mean, please continue.
Oh, no, yeah. And so when we think about prevention, that's one of the reasons why we don't have wide scale prevention, is because we don't have the best estimates. Why don't we have the best estimates? Because there's still social taboo. And because there's still social taboo and status quo that says you should be able to fix it. I don't want to hear about your depression. I don't want to hear about your anxiety. I don't want to hear about your issues, right? That's what society says. There's no numbers, but there's also no funding. And when there's no funding for these things, we don't have equitable and accessible and culturally inclusive programming and supports that helps people, right? Because it's not just throwing services at them, it's walking a journey. So when we look at the scope of a problem, right? Like if we knew everybody in the entire world was impacted by stress and adversity and trauma, that would tell us we have to do something. But we don't know that. And there's social taboo and not a lot of money for it. So that just creates this hot mess of not enough recognition, not enough support. And so what does that leave us with? That leaves us with a system that is reactionary. So instead of preventing things, we're waiting till they're present, and then we're treating them. When I teach my students, I tell them it's like the bad enough. Is it bad enough for us to give money to it? Is it bad enough for us to help somebody, help a family, help a couple, whatever it may be? And unfortunately, we wait until things are bad enough, in that they are severely disruptive to someone's life. No, so what does that mean? Someone has a hard time working, parenting, taking care of themselves, taking care of their household, communicating, going to school. So when things that happen to you are emotionally disruptive to the extent that they're disrupting your daily functioning, then we'll do something, right? When you are at the point of perhaps hurting yourself or self-isolating or coping with substances or shopping or sex, right? Or food, then we'll help, but not before then. So what does prevention look like to me? Prevention starts at the K-12. Prevention starts by talking to little kids about mindfulness and health and mental health and well-being. And then we carry that through to every level of education, all the way up to higher education, and we embed it in communities so that everybody is working together to support each other, because trauma is not only preventable, but it's treatable. So again, if you're listening to this thinking, oh man, I have had like 5 or 6 traumatic things that have happened to me. First, there's nothing wrong with you. Life is hard. Second, it's treatable. It's absolutely treatable. So we can create a system where no one falls through, but we have to change the way we treat each other. We have to change the way we talk about these things.
I mean, you have mentioned a few concepts, right, from anxiety to the taboo to the social demand and social taboo of really how mental health is viewed socially. But I believe the audience may be able to identify the rationale to maybe able to want to hear more about the prevention aspect. If you could examine that further, would you mind giving us a bit much more of a larger aperture as to really how some of the prevention, whether it's from the funding or whether it's from the anxiety point of view?
Yeah, so I think when we think about prevention, some groups, right, some individuals we know are at risk. And those are the groups that we can front load with services and therapy and groups. And trauma often lives in the body. It lives in the body and the mind and the family. So that's where I had mentioned yoga. That's where mindful movement and art therapy and expressive arts can really help you work out some of those elements where it's stuck in your body. So some groups, right, we know are at high risk for trauma exposure, and we can help them and prevent them before it happens. But unfortunately, we might not know if something is traumatic for someone until it happens. And I'll tell you why. Because you and I, Derek, we could both be, let's go back to the car accident example. You and I could both be in a car accident. It could be terribly traumatic for me. And you could be like, whatever, I'm fine, is a fender bender. And we could have been sitting next to each other, having had the same experience, but our brains perceive it differently. So there's what's known as bioindividuality when it comes to trauma. What's traumatic for me is not traumatic for you. So when someone says, I'm really struggling, it's not whether I think they're struggling, it's whether they think they're struggling. And that's all I need to know. So to some extent, my opinion or judgment on someone's trauma is irrelevant. If they're having a hard time, that's all I need to know. So the prevention gets a little bit more murky because I might not know what really is traumatic or the extent with which it is traumatic until it happens. But one of the next sort of steps is making sure that if someone has exposure to something or has an experience that is traumatic or disruptive or tragic in any way, shape, and form, helping them get mental health first aid as soon as possible from a caring and competent provider who is not going to rush them. And de-escalating a situation and regulating a situation as soon as humanly possible may in part determine how profound that trauma becomes for them. So again, that time to treatment after something traumatic is huge. This is why when we look at tragedies that happen in schools, right? One happened today in Nashville in an elementary school, right? I'm not going to say the S word. I'm not going to say the S word. I'm not saying it. But when these things happen, there are entire groups of mental health workers, social workers, psychologists, counselors who are dispatched to schools to treat it right then and there so that someone doesn't have to wait to get help and their mind doesn't spiral and things don't get worse, right? So those who are at risk, front load services, invest in those individuals early on. But when things happen, don't wait. Destigmatize, treat, support, triage, right, with the plan then to help them longer term. And so things like age, developmental level, exposure, previous history with trauma, all of these things can determine whether or not something disruptive becomes traumatic, right? And when something traumatic then becomes what we all know as PTSD, that's when they are profoundly disrupted from their life and well-being and functioning. And that sets off a chemical firestorm in someone's head that is harder to reverse, more long-term. I mean, it's possible. It just takes a little bit more effort the longer, the longer we wait.
No, like the thing you have touched on some very critical areas, right? Where you're bringing in current events as well as touching on those topics that are so relevant. You look at immediate treatment, right? Treating it before a time duration goes by, and then you're also looking at the individual level where people are biased, right? The one that immediate attention. And the prevention variable isn't a matter of really second guessing yourself, but dispatching, as you mentioned, right, immediately, just as you would dispatch firefighters to a burning building. You want to get there as soon as possible. You want to make sure that further exposure or further containment is in place before any serious or before the challenge becomes non-manageable. And to really not go into our second topic here, right, from prevention, right, we can now focus on some of your own personal work. The thing, you probably know Katie Hobbs, the current governor of Arizona. She also went to Arizona State University. You guys share the same alumni, ASU. I don't know if you guys were classmates or not, but to focus more on you, right, during your PhD at ASU, School of Social Work, you wrote a policy statement for the 11th edition of Social Work Speaks at the National Association of Social Workers. The chapter you contributed was Rural Social Work, which to really help the audience focus on really prevention as well as the treatment variables. Like how can Arizona communities really focus on that social work training aspects, right? And as well as and to really focus on the challenges faced by rural social workers. You commenting that the challenging issue of poverty at risk population and service delivery at the community, family, and individual intervention levels that are unique and different from the urban practices, right? So what's your narrative there to really, again, comment further on the prevention aspect on child trauma, substance use, and homelessness?
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a whole other series, but
Episode 2 is coming.
Yeah, episode 2. Like Star Wars. Episode 2 is coming. So a quick correction is that I worked on Social Work Speaks long after my doctorate. I had was a faculty member, and I'd been working in New Mexico, and I was actually running NASW, our professional association in New Mexico, and I was able to chair that chapter with a bunch of other amazing colleagues. And, to get at your comment about workforce development and the challenges sort of rural, urban communities, I think, we can learn and look at what's going on with health now and education in rural communities. Rural communities don't have enough doctors, enough nurses, enough teachers, enough public servants, enough anything, right? And so there's just not the workforce there because there's not a lot of people there. And when there's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of tax money. There's not a lot of funding for that. Doesn't mean there's not a lot of need. So amount of people does not equate, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, does not equate to need, but there's just not a lot of people. And so when we think about bolstering any community, but specifically rural communities, we see mental health deserts. We see food deserts. We see water deserts, right? We see rural hospitals shuttering and closing because they cannot afford to keep their medical care is very expensive. They cannot afford to keep these hospitals open. Again, not because there's not a need, but just because the revenue stream is not there to offset the cost. And so I think about these things when we think about mental health too. Like, we have to think about investing And you have to think about a return on investment when it comes to mental health and social work, but also counseling and psychology and psychiatry and substance abuse counselors and educators and nurses. These are public servants who are going to go into the community. And yeah, it's going to be resource intensive on the front end, but you are going to see entire communities and entire generations change when we fully fund the social welfare system, when we fully fund the help-seeking professions that are preventing some of these things, right? So if we think about waiting until it's bad enough to fund it, we're never going to be caught up, right? We've got to think about an ROI, a return on investment, and we have to have a little bit of delayed gratification. So what does this mean? It means we need to overinvest in areas that maybe aren't super lucrative, right? Because that's the right thing to do. Because it's what you would want for your family. It's what you would want for your community, right? When I was chairing this chapter, I was living in New Mexico. My husband's from New Mexico, and he's from a rural town in northern New Mexico. And at the time, the hospital was starting to have to siphon off and close off units because they couldn't stay open. And they had to close the obstetrics and maternity ward, which meant that women had to drive an hour to get maternity care. And so if you have to drive an hour and you got to work and you got stuff to do and you got kids and all these things, you might forego prenatal care, right? Which also, by the way, includes mental health care in prenatal care. So when we make it hard or cumbersome for people to seek services, they're not going to, let alone expense. So if it's somebody who's not competent, who's far away, who costs a lot of money, and then you got to go there and talk about your trauma, it's not going to happen. And things that stay in darkness get worse, right? It's like an infection. If you don't treat it, it just spreads. And so these are things that we can prevent and treat, but not when we don't have the kind of system that can care for people. And so on my end now at ASU, I have I'm not going to cry. I have the honor and the duty of supporting the next generation of my colleagues, my students who are going to go out in the world and do this work and fan out into the whole country, really the whole world, and do this work of trauma-informed mental health care and integrative, interdisciplinary care where they're working alongside mental health professionals, right? And they are supporting people, not from a you're bad and you're wrong, but from you had a complex life, let's figure out how to get you to where you want to be. And I'll walk that whole way with you. So now I have the honor of sharing what I know and brainstorming with my students to figure out how to invest a little bit more and how to lobby and legislate and advocate so that people see that we're not wanting to waste money. Quite the contrary, we want to invest in people. We want to invest in our environment. We want to invest in our systems so that we can serve each other. And bring some esteem back to public service, right? And
no, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, I was just thinking how, I really would vote for you if you were to run for public office once. I'm not joking, because those are some of the courage that is lacking in not just in government, but having the perspective that the return of investment is the contributive factor, where like having the delayed gratification and not waiting till it's bad enough, but instead looking at how can you prevent the darkness from growing, or how can you really ensure that looking at the need aspect, right, and giving people that confidence that this is not a situation that you're gonna be living with for the rest of your life, but because we are encouraging you to speak up more, you can now see how the social taboo can really fall down in some of these issues.
Just as a point. Yeah, just as a point. So when someone has a mental health need that goes untreated, right? Not only are they going to make less money, right? Because they're not going to be able to show up at work, get promotions, get education, all of these things. So their lifetime earnings go down. And I'm not even including elements around like race and racism in the system. I'm not even talking about that. But just from a mental health perspective, if someone has a mental health situation that goes untreated, they are not going to be able to earn as much as they would compared to one of their peers. Same demographics, right? Who doesn't have that? And so over the course of their life, they're going to have less lifetime earnings. If they have children, that means that they are not able to give economically to their children in an even and fair way. So it's creating generational issues that we can prevent and treat and intervene on. But then also on the back end, from the public end, it's less taxes that go into the public system. So by not investing in people, no one is winning. People aren't winning in this generation. The next generation is not winning because they don't have parents who can fully parent and fully realize their life. But then also the public is not benefit. No one is winning by underfunding funding these systems. Everybody thinks it's too expensive. And I'm like, it's not too expensive. It's just your partisan politics that doesn't want to, you don't want to fund these things. And it's funny, you mentioned running for office. I tell my students all the time, and this is not the first time I've heard that, by the way. And I say to them, but the problem is that I don't think that either side is getting it right. I think that at this point, our conversation has devolved in such a way that we want to be right more than we want to yell at each other. And we want to be trendy on social media sometimes, and we do problem solve. I'm not saying everybody is bad. I just think that there's a lot of
solve, right?
Yeah. And so my political party is social work. It's not about me.
Right.
It's about serving other people. And if it doesn't work for other people, then let's not do it. If it doesn't help the greater good, right? So,
well, the bipartisan approach is really something that you are championing, which is neither party has the solution. Let's problem solve. And I think you're also adding some really credible viewpoints, which this whole episode has been remarkable. My sheet of paper is like full with notes here. And I'm gonna, I think one of my goals is to frame this and put it on the wall and look at, let this age and look at how amazing it ends up. And to really now go further into our conversation, right, is to look at some of the natural mental health supports that are available. I think looking at when you speak of funding, you're speaking of really attacking those issues that are really cumbersome, as you mentioned. But like every other issue, right, I think they are natural. Like being a yoga teacher for me is something that I want to personally accomplish. You just be able to I think one, have the certification, but two, I don't have a goal of having a yoga studio someday, but it's a lifelong goal to just be able to teach yoga. But diving into as childhood trauma remains the biggest mystery, right? As children grow up, they increase responsibility of everyday life. Life is hard. They become an impact. The question has already been answered, but what sort of natural mental health support would you encourage people to cater towards? So we speak of hiking, but looking at veterans too as well, right? You're looking at substance use, looking at the trajectory of coping with PTSD. How can tools like technology be an asset to some of these circumstances? Some of the immediate solutions that you would encourage anyone to really gravitate towards, as well as natural means that are available at the frontier of mental health support, whether it's curbing traumatic ramifications or social adult stigmatization. What would you want to leave the audience that are experiencing predators? That word has always been mystical to me, so I used to think it was predators, but predators. But to really wrap it up, what natural resources or best practices with mental health support?
Yeah. So this is a whole other episode. So I think one of the first things I want to say is that if you're listening and you are somebody in a professional role, a social worker, a counselor, a teacher, whatever it may be, one of the best things you can do is tend to yourself and tend to your own self-care and get a therapist who knows how to work with therapists. Because oftentimes it's what we do. Absolutely. It's the interventions, but it's also who we are. And being able to listen to somebody, hear their trauma narrative, and really hear them without judgment, that's incredibly profound. So sometimes it's what you do, but also sometimes it's who you are. And that means that you sometimes are the intervention. So you got to take care of yourself first and foremost. So if you're someone like me who does this for, as a career, as a passion, that self-care, you all know what I'm talking about. You got to do that. If you are in a family role and you are helping someone in a family role, shelve your biases at the door, own them, know them, whether or not you think you're right, whether or not you recall it happening that way. Again, listening is one of the best supportive things that you can do. From somebody who is going through it and is in the middle of it, you got to acknowledge and that you're in it. And sometimes you just got to call it a day. Say, I just had enough today. I'm calling in sick to life and I'm going to take care of myself. If you don't have a boss, a teacher, a partner who can help you when you need help, that's a whole other conversation. But just honor that we all sometimes need a break and take that break. And when we think about what you can do to help yourself regulate, it's pretty simple. Getting outside, drinking water, taking a shower, moving your body in a way that feels good, not in a way where you sweat and you're trying to build muscle and you're trying to get that six pack. That's not how trauma-informed movement works. Think about how your body feels good and do that. Sometimes that's gardening. Sometimes that's walking. Sometimes that's yoga. Sometimes that's dancing, even if you aren't coordinated, right? Sometimes it's playing with your dog. If you have an animal, lean into that, because animal-supported healing is evidence-based and it's profound. If you don't have an animal, find somebody who does and pet that animal, because they are incredibly therapeutic. I tell my students all the time, if you're struggling, I want you to remember the acronym HALT. HALT. Are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? If you're hungry, get something to eat and drink more water, because we're all dehydrated. If you're angry, don't go to bed angry. Do something about it, or talk to somebody. If you're lonely, go find your friend and get a hug. And if you're tired, lean into that, because trauma is exhausting. Sometimes you just need to sleep. There are a bunch of amazing mental health apps that you can use. There's telehealth, there's texting. You can text counselors and things like that. So there's lots of different ways to connect. But I would say the last thing I want to say about this is when we think about self-care, it's often sensationalized, right? And it's clickbaity, and people make you pay for it, and it's become monetized. It's become involved integrated into the market of capitalism, and it doesn't have to be that way. Self-care is anyone or anything that makes you feel like you. So if it doesn't make you feel like you, if a person, place, thing, food, cultural practice, then it's not right? So if something makes you feel bad, don't do it, right? Watch your habits: gambling, smoking, drinking, eating, shopping, sexual behavior, social behavior, either too much or not enough. These can all become very maladaptive, right? If you need alcohol every night to sleep, that's not good long-term, right? So kind of know who you are, know what makes you feel good, know who makes you feel good, and go to them. And I always tell my students to have one or two friends that know you enough, and you have this agreement with them, so that if you're having a hard day, you can just call them.
Exactly.
It's your own support network. You can just call and be like, hey, I need to come over, or hey, can we watch an episode of TV together, or hey, can you just listen? Those are people that are not going to question, right? So think ahead of time about what you can do when you're not feeling good. Put it on a note, frame it, these are my people, these are my things, this is what I gotta do.
Right.
And know the things that you're gonna want to do, which are not great. Gamble, drink, have sex, smoke, whatever you're gonna do. And just sort of know what you're working with so that when your trauma is triggered, call my best friend, don't go to the casino, right? Take a shower, don't drink alcohol, whatever it may be. So you kind of know how your brain is working. Yeah.
No, yeah, like I think you mentioned one thing that like I think is very therapeutic is drinking water. I'm a huge hiker, so like I tend to my car has more water bottles like in it than my fridge does, but that's kind of on the basis where like the weather has been amazing lately. You have had some really cool California is having a whole different environment, but I think I've been going out hiking recently, and I know, I think just as you said, drinking water is a very therapeutic thing. The whole acronym, very effective as well, and just some of the things that you mentioned, right, where like those general principles really can really strengthen your support system. And having that friend that can really be non-questioning, right, that you can really build that trust, and even for therapists, that therapy or the therapist, which is something that I've never thought about, but those are really like I said.
I have one more thing to add.
Please please do. Yeah,
don't be afraid. If you have thoughts of harming yourself or ending your own life, reach out to the suicide hotline. They have a text line. They're amazing. They are non-judgmental, culturally competent people. They will sit and talk with you and just listen. So if you're feeling that way, anybody listening, do me a favor, hang on for one more night, call them. They'll help you, right? You can get through it. And your best days are ahead of you. You have to hold on to that. Imagine your life living, I haven't had my best day yet. And hang on to that. And don't be afraid to use those people. That's what they do. They help you when you're feeling like you can't manage anymore. So.
Exactly. No, I haven't had my best day yet. And how can the audience reach out to you?
I can give you my email if anybody ever wants to come meet. If you're interested in social work and you want to come learn about social work, I'm happy to talk about that all day. We only talked about a little part of the work.
Season 3 is coming. So like I think that is one of the cool things about the podcast is really where bringing in the audience, and you are speaking to a large volume of listeners, and I think the goal is to I went to New Paths for Youth headquarters in downtown Phoenix a few days ago, and I really learned a lot about some of the situations that we just discussed, and I think it's just amazing to hear that yes, there is alternatives, there are routes further, and I think just being able to reach out to the support and building that support, as well as tackling the childhood trauma ecosystem, is a good way to really start, like you said, right, containing the situation early rather than letting it become into a bigger issue. So I think your email is the ASU email.
Yep, that's correct. And if anybody has questions afterwards too, we can work on it in the interim or on episode 2, whatever you need to do. So
thank you so much. Just to wrap it up, we have covered AZ Town Hall, one of the local organizations here that focuses on mental health, as well as substance use and homelessness. We went into some of your own work in New Mexico, as well as looking at some of the political as well as policy variants in social works, and I think it's just good to always gain a very credible view. Like I've been saying your name wrong again.
That's okay. That's what happens. It's okay. Elisa. It's okay. It's all good.
Elisa.
Yep.
Elisa, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it, and I think episode 2, season 3, featuring Elisa Kuwam, coming soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Read the Future Conversations is providing this podcast for educational purposes only. Read the Future is a nonpartisan not-for-profit. It neither takes any position on any political issue nor endorses any candidates, political parties, or public policy proposals. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Read the Future. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Read the Future employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of Read the Future or any of its officials.